I'm Abigail Foster, 35, and my entire life has been overshadowed by my family's contempt. At my father's 60th birthday party in Raleigh, I sat quietly in the corner, staring at nothing more than a cold, dry piece of bread. The laughter around me echoed, yet my stepmother's cruel words cut through it all. "That's all you deserve." My sister smirked, adding, "Always invisible, always pathetic." Their words pierced like knives, but tonight I wasn't here to beg for scraps. I had come with a plan. The room sparkled with lights and the clinking of glasses. 60 guests, friends, business partners, the elite of Raleigh, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. In my pocket, a small USB drive made my heart pound like a war drum. When it was time for the speeches, I rose to my feet, legs trembling but eyes steady. "Let's watch something real," I said, my voice slicing through the noise. The screen lit up, and in that instant my stepmother's smile froze. My sister's eyes widened in shock. Whispers died away, replaced by a heavy silence. "Turn it off!" My stepmother screamed, her voice shrill, but it was already too late. All the guests sat in stunned silence, their eyes locked on the screen, and I knew the truth had finally been revealed. If you were in my place, would you dare expose everything in front of your family and friends, or would you stay silent to keep the peace? Share your thoughts. In the comments, your answer might inspire someone who's facing the same battle. Days before I faced my family, I sat in my Raleigh apartment staring at an email that felt like a trap. As a documentary filmmaker, I spend my days chasing stories of people the world overlooks, ironic since that's been my life. My tiny studio, cluttered with camera gear and half-edited scripts, is my sanctuary in a city that worships wealth. My mother passed when I was 5, leaving me with memories too faint to hold. By 7, my stepmother moved in with her daughter Shannon, 3 years my junior. That's when everything changed. Karen, with her cold stare, made it clear I wasn't her priority. Shannon, always trailing her, learned to mimic that disdain, her smirks cutting deeper than words. Growing up, I was the afterthought. Karen dressed Shannon in designer clothes, paid for her piano lessons, and cheered at her school plays. Me, I got faded jeans and silence. At 10, I asked to join a family dinner with Dad's business partners. Karen's response was sharp. "You're not part of this." Shannon chimed in. "Stay out of it, Abby." Dad, buried in his real estate deals, didn't notice or didn't care. I shrank, learning to stay quiet to blend into the walls of our sprawling Raleigh house. My escape was a cheap camcorder I bought at 16, filming stories of kids like me, ones nobody saw. Karen called it wasted time. Shannon scoffed. "Your films won't change anything." I left home at 18, piecing together a life through scholarships and late-night editing sessions. Shannon, meanwhile, glided through college on family money-landing internships, Dad's name secured. Karen threw her a lavish graduation party I wasn't invited to. Dad sent me a check with a scribbled note, "Congrats." That was it. The distance between us grew, but the sting of being less than never faded. I poured it into my work, crafting documentaries that won small awards, but never the spotlight. My friend Ellen Reed, a graphic designer I met in high school, was the only one who saw what I could do. Over coffee at a downtown cafe, she'd say, "Your films matter, Abby. Don't let them dim you." When the email for Dad's birthday arrived, signed by Karen, my first instinct was to delete it. The words were formal, like I was a distant cousin, not family. I pictured walking into that elegant hall surrounded by Raleigh's elite, only to be ignored again. Why bother? But Ellen, sprawled on my couch, grabbed my phone. "You're going," she said, her voice firm. "Not to please them, to prove you're not invisible." I stared at her, my chest tight. I'd spent years dodging these confrontations, burying the hurt in my work. But Ellen's words hit hard. She was right. I wasn't that kid hiding in her room anymore. I thought back to moments that still burned, like the Christmas when Karen gave Shannon a sapphire bracelet while I got a bookstore gift card. Or Shannon's Sweet 16, where Karen rented a ballroom but my graduation passed, with a text from Dad proud of you. Every slight built a wall, but it also built me. My films, my grit, they came from that pain. I wasn't going to that party to beg for a seat at their table. I was going to stand tall to face the family that pushed me aside. 2 weeks before the party, Ellen burst into my apartment one evening, her eyes wide with urgency. She'd been sketching at a downtown Raleigh cafe when she overheard Shannon on her phone, her voice hushed but smug. "It's all set," Kyle Shannon said, barely audible over the clink of coffee cups. "The shares will be mine soon." Ellen caught the name Kyle Shannon's friend, always lurking at family gatherings with a slick grin. She didn't hear much else, but that phrase, K. Hoach Kofan, sent a chill through her. When she told me, my heart skipped. Cher's dad's real estate company was his life's work, the cornerstone of our family's wealth. Why was Shannon whispering about it like a thief? I felt a knot in my stomach. Karen had always pushed Shannon to the front, grooming her to inherit Dad's legacy, while I was left out of every boardroom talk. Was this their latest scheme to cut me out completely? Or worse, were they plotting against Dad? Ellen, pacing my living room, didn't mince words. "Shannon's up to something," she said, tossing her sketch pad on the couch. "She's not smart enough to cover her tracks." I nodded, my mind racing. I'd spent years capturing other people's secrets on film, now I had to uncover my family's. We started digging that night. Ellen remembered a shared cloud account from a freelance job she'd done for Shannon's marketing side hustle. Shannon, true to form, hadn't changed her password. We huddled over my laptop, the screen's glow casting shadows as we scrolled through her messages. Most were trivial dress fittings, lunch plans, but then we found a thread with Kyle Ramsey, Shannon's college buddy. "Make sure the papers are ready," Shannon typed. "Dad won't suspect a thing." Kyle's response was blunt. "Karen's got the lawyer lined up." My breath caught. They were planning to transfer Dad's company shares to Shannon, tricking him into signing them away. Karen was orchestrating it, using her charm to keep Dad clueless. I stared at the screen, anger bubbling up. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was betrayal, pure and cold. Dad had poured his soul into that company, building it from a single office to a Raleigh empire. I pictured him in his study, signing deals with that quiet pride, unaware his wife and stepdaughter were scheming behind him. Ellen, leaning over my shoulder, muttered, "They're playing dirty." I nodded, my jaw tight. "We need proof," I said, "something they can't deny." We kept searching. One message from Kyle jumped out. "Bring the documents tomorrow." All set for the transfer. Attached was a draft agreement detailing how Dad's majority shares would go to Shannon, with Karen's signature already scrawled at the bottom. I saved it to a USB drive, my hands shaking. This was bigger than I'd imagined, a calculated move to strip Dad of his legacy. I thought of confronting Karen, but her sharp tongue would twist it against me. Shannon would just laugh. No, I needed something solid, something public. Ellen had an idea. "Let's catch them talking," she said, her voice low. The next afternoon, she trailed Shannon to a bar on Fayetteville Street, blending in with the crowd. I stayed back, editing footage at home, my phone buzzing with her updates. "They're here," she texted, then sent a shaky audio clip from her phone. Shannon's voice came through clear and cocky. "Once Dad signs, it's ours. He trusts Karen too much." Kyle's laugh crackled in the background. "He's got no idea." I gripped my phone, fury rising. They thought they could play Dad for a fool, and me along with him. Back at my place, Ellen and I pieced it together. Karen would slip the papers into a routine contract, convincing Dad it was business as usual. Shannon would get the shares, and I'd be left with nothing. Not that I wanted the money, but the lies cut deep. Ellen looked at me, her eyes fierce. "You've got enough to bury them," she said. I clutched the USB, my resolve steeling. The party was my shot to expose them. The night of the party arrived. I walked into the historic Raleigh Hall, its wooden columns and chandeliers glowing with old money charm. The air buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, the kind of crowd that thrived on status. I'd dressed simply a black dress, no frills, knowing I'd never blend in with the tailored suits and sparkling gowns. My hand rested in my pocket fingers, brushing the USB drive that held the truth about Karen and Shannon's scheme. It was my anchor, a reminder of why I was here. I scanned the room for Dad, hoping for a glance of warmth, but he was lost in a sea of handshakes, his face lit by the glow of business talk. A young waiter approached, his expression polite but stiff. "This way, ma'am," he said, leading me past the main tables where Raleigh's elite sipped wine to a small table tucked near the emergency exit. The chair wobbled, the tablecloth was stained, and a single plate sat before me with a dry piece of bread. I stared at it, my chest tightening. This wasn't an oversight, it was deliberate. Karen's touch was all over it. I caught her eye across the room, her lips curling into a faint, satisfied smirk. She glided over her silk dress, rustling, and leaned in close. "That's all you deserve," she said, her voice low, dripping with disdain. Shannon, trailing behind in a glittering gown, let out a sharp laugh. "Always invisible," she added, her words slicing through the hum of the party. I gripped the USB tighter, my knuckles white. Their words stung, but I'd heard worse growing up. This time, I wasn't the kid who shrank away. I forced a smile, holding Karen's gaze. "Nice setup," I said, my tone steady, though my heart pounded. She raised an eyebrow, surprised I'd spoken, then turned away, dismissing me with a flick of her wrist. Shannon lingered, her smirk widening. "Don't embarrass us tonight," she said before sauntering back to the main table where she basked in the attention of Dad's business partners. I sat alone, the bread untouched, my mind racing. The hall's grandeur felt suffocating, polished floors reflecting the light walls lined with portraits of Raleigh's past. I noticed the other guests glancing my way, some with pity, others with disinterest. A woman in a pearl necklace whispered to her companion, her eyes flicking toward my table. I straightened, refusing to slouch. I wasn't here for their approval. The USB in my pocket was proof I had something they didn't. Truth. I thought of the messages I'd found, the audio of Shannon and Kyle plotting to steal Dad's company. That knowledge kept me grounded even as the room seemed to close in. Dad finally appeared, moving through the crowd with a tired smile. I stood hoping to catch his eye, but Karen intercepted him, her hand on his arm, steering him toward a group of investors. He didn't see me, or maybe he chose not to. The familiar ache hit, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about winning his love tonight. It was about stopping a lie. I scanned the room for the projector, set up, my plan taking shape. The speeches would come soon, and I'd be ready. As the evening wore on, waiters circled with trays of champagne, but none stopped at my table. A man in a sharp suit bumped into my chair, muttering an apology without looking at me. I felt the weight of every slight, every moment I'd been pushed aside, but I also felt the USB solid and real, a weapon I'd wield when the time came. Karen and Shannon thought they could bury me with a piece of bread and a corner table. They were wrong. As the speeches began, I felt the weight of the moment. The MC's voice echoed through the hall, praising Dad's legacy in real estate. The crowd applauded as Karen stepped up, her smile polished, talking about family and loyalty. I could barely listen, my pulse racing. This was it, my chance to show them all. I caught the eye of the AV tech I'd spoken to earlier, a nervous kid who'd agreed to help after I slipped him $20. I gave him a nod, and he slipped into the control booth. Karen finished to polite claps, and the MC called for more remarks. I stood, my legs steady despite the knot in my chest. "I have something to share," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. Heads turned, some curious, others annoyed. Karen's smile froze, and Shannon's eyes narrowed from the main table. I walked to the stage, the USB in my hand, and handed it to the tech. "Play it," I whispered. He plugged it in, and the screen behind me flickered to life. The video started with a grainy text message blown up for all to see, Shannon's words to Kyle. "Make sure the papers are ready. Dad won't suspect a thing." Gasps rippled through the room. The screen shifted to another message, Karen's name clear, the lawyers set. Then came the audio clip. Shannon's voice unmistakable. Once Dad signs, it's ours. He trusts Karen too much. Kyle's laugh followed cold and smug. He's got no idea. The crowd went silent, the air heavy with shock. I stood still watching their faces, some wide-eyed others whispering furiously. Karen's composure cracked. She stood, her voice sharp. Turn it off, she snapped, but the tech looked at me unsure. I shook my head, and the video kept rolling, showing the draft agreement with Karen's signature outlining the plan to transfer Dad's shares to Shannon. The hall erupted in murmurs, guests turning to each other, their faces a mix of disbelief and outrage. I glanced at Dad, his expression shifting from confusion to something darker, betrayal. He stood slowly, his eyes locked on Karen. Before anyone could move, Kyle stumbled in from the back, his face flushed, clearly caught off guard. It's true, he blurted, his voice shaky as eyes turned to him. Shannon and Karen, they planned it all. I just followed orders. The room exploded in chaos, guests shouting questions, some glaring at Shannon, who sat frozen, her charm shattered. Karen stepped toward Dad, her hands raised, voice trembling. Gregory. It's not what it looks like, she said, but he cut her off, his face hard. Explain this. Dad said, his voice low but piercing, pointing at the screen. Shannon tried to speak, her words stumbling. Dad, it was just a misunderstanding, she said, but her voice cracked, unconvincing. I stood silent, letting the evidence speak. The guests' whispers grew louder, their judgment clear. A woman in a velvet dress leaned toward her husband, muttering about disgrace. A man in a tuxedo shook his head, staring at Karen. I felt a strange calm, the weight of years lifting. I'd done what I came to do. Dad turned to me, his eyes searching mine. For the first time that night, he saw me, really saw me. You did this? He asked, his voice soft but heavy. I nodded, my throat tight. I had to, I said. He didn't respond, but his gaze held something new. Respect maybe, or regret. Karen tried again, her voice shrill. She's lying, Gregory. She's always been jealous, but the crowd wasn't listening. The evidence was undeniable, and her mask had slipped. Shannon stood, her face pale, and tried to slip toward the exit, but guests blocked her path, their stares cold. Kyle, still standing, awkwardly muttered, I didn't mean for this, but trailed off as heads turned. The hall felt smaller, the chandelier's glow harsher as the truth settled over everyone. I stepped back, my role done. I'd spent years being invisible, but tonight I'd made them see. The MC cleared his throat, trying to regain control, but the night was broken. The room still buzzed with tension. I stood off the stage, my heart steady, but my hands clenched, watching the chaos unfold. A tall man in a tailored suit stood up from the main table, his face stern. Matthew Stone, senior partner at Stone & Associates, he announced, his voice cutting through the noise. Gregory, we've trusted your family for years, but this... He gestured at the frozen screen still displaying Karen's signed agreement. We're done here. The merger is off. The crowd gasped, heads turning to Dad, whose face paled. Karen lurched forward, her voice shrill. This is a mistake, she cried, her hands trembling as she faced Matthew. Those documents were just drafts. Nothing was finalized. Her words sounded desperate, clinging to a crumbling facade. Shannon jumped, and her face flushed. It's all a misunderstanding, she said, forcing a smile. Abigail twisted everything, but her voice wavered and the guests weren't buying it. A woman in a sapphire dress turned away, whispering to her companion. A man in a bow tie shook his head, his expression cold. The room's mood had shifted, no one trusted them anymore. I watched silent as the weight of their lies crushed them. Matthew didn't bother responding. He nodded to his team, who gathered their coats and headed for the exit, their footsteps echoing in the now quiet hall. Other guests followed, some muttering about broken trust, others casting sharp glances at Karen and Shannon. A couple near the bar stood abruptly, leaving half-finished drinks. The party, once alive with laughter, felt like a funeral. I caught snippets of conversation disgrace. How could they, as Raleigh's elite, abandon the family they'd once courted? Dad stood motionless, his shoulders slumped. I'd never seen him like this, stripped of his usual confidence. He looked at Karen, then Shannon, his eyes heavy with disappointment. "You did this behind my back?" he said, his voice low, almost breaking. Karen reached for his arm, her face pleading. "Gregory, please let me explain," she said, but he pulled away, shaking his head. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the double doors, his silhouette fading into the dim hallway. The sight hit me harder than I expected, not triumph, but a quiet ache for the father I'd always wanted closer. Shannon spun toward me, her eyes blazing. "You ruined everything." She hissed, her voice sharp enough to draw stares. I met her gaze, unflinching. "You did that yourself?" I said, my tone calm but firm. She froze, her mouth open, but no words came. Karen, still standing near the stage, looked small for the first time, her elegance undone. "You'll regret this," she muttered, but her threat lacked weight. The guests who remained ignored her, their backs turned as they whispered among themselves. I felt no need to respond. Their world was collapsing, and I'd only held up a mirror. Standing there, I felt something shift inside me. The years of being pushed aside, of being unseen, didn't vanish, but they loosened their grip. I wasn't the kid hiding in her room anymore, or the woman relegated to a corner table. I'd stood up, shown the truth, and the room had seen me. A woman in a red gown approached, her expression soft. "That took courage," she said quietly before walking away. Another guest, an older man with glasses, gave me a nod, his face unreadable, but not unkind. Their gestures, small as they were, grounded me. The hall emptied quickly, the clink of glasses replaced by the hum of hushed voices. Karen and Shannon stood alone near the stage, their faces drawn, no longer the untouchable duo they'd been. I didn't gloat, I didn't need to. The truth had done its work. I thought of my films, the stories I'd told for others, and realized this was mine. I'd spent years documenting pain and resilience, and tonight, I'd lived it. Months later, the dust had settled, and I faced a new reality. The family company crumbled faster than I'd expected. Without Matthew Stone's merger, other partners pulled out, spooked by the scandal. By spring, Dad's real estate empire, once a Raleigh cornerstone, was bankrupt. I read about it in the local paper, the headline, "Stark Foster Properties Collapses Amid Betrayal." I felt a pang for Dad, who'd poured his life into those buildings, but I didn't regret my choice. The truth had been necessary, even if it tore everything down. Karen's fall was just as swift. Raleigh's high society, once her playground, turned its back. I heard she showed up at a charity gala, her usual elegance intact, but the women she'd once dined with, ladies in pearls and tailored dresses, gave her cold shoulders. Whispers followed her. She betrayed Gregory. Invitations dried up, and her name vanished from the social pages. I saw her once crossing Hillsborough Street, her face drawn, clutching a coffee cup like it was her only anchor. I didn't stop to speak. There was nothing left to say. Shannon's charm couldn't save her either. Her marketing gigs, built on her polished image, evaporated. A major ad campaign with a regional bank dropped her after the news spread her face no longer welcome on billboards. I overheard a former client at a downtown cafe saying, "She thought she could play everyone." Shannon tried to pivot, posting desperate updates on social media, but the comments were brutal accusations. Mockery, silence. She'd always thrived on attention, but now it was gone, replaced by a void she couldn't fill. Dad retreated entirely. He moved to a small condo outside Raleigh, cutting contact with Karen and Shannon. I tried calling once, leaving a voicemail, but he didn't respond. A mutual friend told me he was spending his days fishing, a quiet escape from the wreckage. I wanted to reach out to rebuild something, but his silence spoke louder than words. He'd trusted Karen, believed in Shannon, and their betrayal had broken him. I carried that weight, knowing my actions had forced him to see it, but I couldn't undo the past. For me, life took a different turn. A week after the party, I got a call from Susan Clark, a producer I'd met at a local film festival years ago. She'd been at the gala, one of the few who'd nodded at me with respect. "Your courage stuck with me," she said, her voice warm over the phone. "I've got a project, a documentary on family legacies. You in?" I met her at a small studio off Glenwood Avenue where we pored over contracts and storyboards. Susan's confidence in me felt new, untainted by the family drama. I signed the deal, my pen steady, a spark of pride igniting. It was my first real break, a chance to tell stories that mattered. The work consumed me. I spent mornings editing footage, afternoons scouting locations, my apartment now a maze of scripts and coffee mugs. Susan pushed me to dig deeper, to capture raw truths, the kind I'd always chased. I thought back to my old camcorder days filming shadows to feel seen, but this was different. I was building something of my own, not proving myself to anyone. The crew respected me, their nods and quick smiles, a quiet validation. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. Raleigh felt smaller now, its old wounds fading. I walked past the shuttered Foster Properties office one evening, its sign, rusted windows dark. I didn't linger. The past was done and I was moving forward. Susan's project was gaining buzz with screenings planned across the state. I poured myself into it, framing shots that told stories of loss and resilience, echoes of my own journey. My name, my work was starting to carry weight. I thought of Dad, sometimes wondering if he'd ever call. I hoped he'd find peace, maybe even pride in what I'd become. Karen and Shannon were shadows now, their lives unraveling while mine took shape. I didn't wish them harm, but their absence felt like freedom. The city, once a cage of expectations, was now a canvas for my stories. I sat at my desk one night, the script open, and felt a quiet strength. This was my future, and I was ready to write it. A year later, I stood on my own stage, ready to share my work. The theater on Hargett Street was packed, the air humming with anticipation. My documentary, a tapestry of family legacies woven with raw honesty, was about to premiere. I stood at the podium, my hands steady, looking out at faces I didn't know, strangers who'd come to see my story. The lights dimmed and the screen glowed, each frame a piece of my heart. I watched the audience lean forward, their eyes locked on scenes of fractured bonds and quiet triumphs. When the credits rolled, applause erupted, warm and genuine. I felt a swell of pride, not just for the film, but for the path that led me here. After the screening, people lingered, their voices soft as they shared their own stories. A young woman in a denim jacket thanked me, her eyes bright. "Your film made me want to speak up," she said. An older man in a tweed cap shook my hand, saying, "You've got something real here." Their words stayed with me, proof that my work mattered. Susan had been right, telling the truth even when it hurt could move people. I signed posters in the lobby, my name in bold print, a marker of how far I'd come. Later that week, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in months, Karen's. Her voicemail was hesitant, her voice stripped of its usual edge. "We need to talk," she said, "for old times' sake." I listened, my thumb hovering over the call button, but I didn't press it. I deleted the message, my heart calm. Karen's world had unraveled, and she wanted something from me, forgiveness maybe, or a way back into my life. But I was done carrying her weight. I'd spent years under her shadow, and I wouldn't step back into it. I turned off my phone and walked away, the decision final. One crisp morning, I drove to the old Raleigh Hall, its wooden columns now weathered, the chandeliers dark. The building stood empty, a relic of that night when everything changed. I parked and stepped out, my camera in hand. The air was cool, the street quiet. I framed a shot of myself in front of the hall, my reflection faint in the glass doors. The click of the shutter felt like a full stop, a way to mark my freedom. This place, once a stage for my pain, was now just a backdrop. I wasn't the woman relegated to a corner table anymore. I was someone new, unburdened. I thought about the journey that brought me here. The truth had been my weapon, not to destroy, but to build. Exposing Karen and Shannon's scheme had cost me a family, but it gave me something greater, myself. I'd learned that silence could trap you, but speaking out, even when your voice shook, could set you free. I wanted others to know that too. At the screening, I'd ended my speech with a simple call: stand up for your truth. It's worth it. I hoped someone somewhere would hear it and find their own courage. Raleigh had changed for me. Its streets, once heavy with memories, now felt open, full of possibility. I drove past cafes and parks, seeing them with new eyes. My apartment, cluttered with scripts and film reels, was a space of creation, not escape. I was no longer defined by what I'd lost, but by what I'd built. The documentary was just the start. Susan had pitched another project, and I was ready to dive in to keep telling stories that mattered. As I stood in my kitchen that night, pouring coffee, I felt a quiet certainty. The past would always be there, a shadow in the corner, but it no longer held me. I'd faced it, named it, and let it go. My camera sat on the counter, ready for the next frame. I was free, not just from Karen or the family or that old hall, but from the fear of being unseen. The truth had given me that, and I'd carry it forward, one story at a time.